Hello, friends, and welcome back to Ghouls Night In, the spooky chat show with your best ghoul friends. I'm Penny Snark,
And I'm Midge Munster.
and so we talked last year about catacomb saints and
Yeah, one
how
of my favorite freaking episodes of all time.
hell yeah, how those bones were removed from the historic catacombs to come live a fabulous, bejeweled life in some European churches. But that begs the question, what are catacombs? When did those get started? Why did we put
Yeah.
bodies there and why did we stop? And I want to talk about that today.
Oh boy, I wish you would.
Oh, yeah. So, Midge, is there a place that you think of when you think about catacombs?
Oh yeah, I mean obviously France. Uh
Hmm. Yes.
yeah, I've always wanted to visit the catacombs. That's on like my big bucket list.
Me too. Me too. Yeah, Paris was also the first thing that came to mind for me. But catacombs started in Rome around the second century.
Hmm.
So what we recognize as the first catacombs were located between the second and third milestone of the Appian Way, one of Rome's famous roads. You know, they love building those roads.
They do love their
They
roads.
do. So this is said to be where St. Peter and St. Paul of, the Catholic saints, were interred.
Famously of the Saints
Of
TM.
the saints, yes. And it was known as catacumbus in late Latin. So we're not actually
Great band name.
right. We're not actually sure what that means. Like if it's a reference to a proper name or something. One theory is that I guess the Greek phrase catacumbus, two words, means like by the quarry or like near the hollows.
Mm.
So it's presumably like a descriptive name for the fact that there is this catacomb there. So that it kind of like we call it that because people called it that because there was a catacomb. So that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, huh.
And so the term catacomb originally only referred to like this specific one, but has since become a more general term for that kind of burial space.
I
So
love when that kind of weird word adoption happens, and
right,
now it's just like every single catacomb is not by the quarry.
right, yep. It's like we'll just call it this. This makes sense. So catacombs in Rome came about for a variety of reasons. So it was the law in Rome that you could not bury a body within the city walls. So
Hmm.
any interment had to happen outside of the city. At the time, it was the more common, like Roman custom to cremate your dead. But as I think we've mentioned in previous episodes, cremation has not historically been chill with the
With
Christians.
with the yeah, I was gonna
And
say Roman Catholicism coming in hot.
yep. And at this point, Christians were new and like a secret cult and kind of doing their own spooky stuff. Um, but the surrounding area around Rome, there were already a bunch of like tunnels and, as we kind of mentioned, quarry type places where the Etruscans had been like mining for gems and ore and the things that you want from rocks and
You know, the things you want from
the things you
rocks.
want from rocks. And so there is volcanic rock in this area called tufa that apparently is like relatively easy to tunnel into.
Hmm.
So those existed, and I feel like we like think about urban crowding as like a modern problem. But Rome was like just super overwhelmed, and they
Yeah.
were like building upwards, and like buildings were 4 to 5 stories tall, which is like not what I picture when I think about like the ancient times.
Right, yeah.
Um, but with all of these, buildings and stuff going up, people were like, hey, we've got these underground tunnels that no one's really using. Let's start putting the dead bodies in there. Um, and that also obviously provided like a little bit of like, uh, oh, I don't know if it's like fully secret, but like more private space since you were like doing some weird Christian shit in there.
Sure. A little bit of, privacy from your neighbors.
Yes, yes. So I guess these were like often located like under the homes of like prominent Christians. And so they would be
Oh.
like, yeah, you can use the tunnels under my house for for the dead.
Soups cash, yeah.
Soup's cash, you know. So catacomb
"See, Christians, you used to be goth, what happened?"
right, I know. Like reading all this, I'm just like, this is just goth as hell.
"You
And
can use the tunnels under my house for your dead."
so these tunnels could get to like 16 feet tall, which is
Oh,
a pretty
wow.
big tunnel. And they have thousands of niches for bodies, which are called loculi. I don't speak Latin, but I'm trying. Or if you were a rich bitch, you could have a cubicula. Do you know what
Oh,
that might be?
I'm gonna guess that it's a cube-shaped situation.
So that is like an individual chamber of loculi that's just for your family. So it's like a
Okay.
family crypt, basically. Um,
It's
and
like
it's
the OG mausoleum.
exactly. And in this
Yeah.
area is where we see like a lot of frescoes and like early Christian art
Mm,
that still remains. And I'm not going to dive into it because it's really not relevant to this podcast. But it was just really interesting to read about some of this like early art and see things that are still very much part of like Christianity and Catholicism today that like
that
are
were there at, like,
represented
the
here. And like they were
beginnings, yeah.
yeah, like, they were talking about how, like, a lot of, like, the very earliest art is all, like, these depictions of, like, the shepherd and his flock kind of
Hmm.
type stuff, which is very much still what they're about today.
Yeah, wha
So these were primarily used by Christians, but there were also Jewish and pagan burials in catacombs. There were 40 catacombs built in the suburbs of Rome. There is a prevalent myth, which I definitely heard growing up, that like Christians would secretly worship in the catacombs since it was all
Mm,
kind of like secret. But it sounds like that's not really supported by any historical evidence.
okay.
People like you would hold like your funerary events and things there, or like you might come down and like have like a feast to like celebrate like the anniversary of the death of like a martyr or something like that. But one, they're not that big.
Sure.
Like you couldn't really fit like probably enough people to hold like a whole service
You're not
in
having a congregation in the
yeah, like, they
catacombs,
wouldn't all
yeah.
be in there, and, I mean, there was still a very strong death taboo for these people, so it's pretty unlikely that they would, like, regularly want to be hanging around the dead
Mhm.
bodies unless it was, like, something that was specifically related to, like, a funeral type of thing. So why did we stop using these? Um, so Christianity became an accepted state religion in Rome, and at first people were like really hyped because they were like, "Ah, these are where the like martyrs were. I want to be buried there with them." But eventually, like there were churches, people started getting buried in churchyards, and it just kind of fell out of fashion, kind of. People started looting the graves to, you know, grab like any treasures and stuff, and it became really common to try and like hide or cover the entrance. And they
Mm,
really were forgotten until one was rediscovered in 1578 by an archaeologist named Antonio Bosio.
great
So,
name.
yep, he went in there. He started discovering and exploring the catacombs more, and like wrote a whole book about it. But yeah, that's a long time. Like they that
It
was
is, yeah.
so they sat there for a while, and of course, a lot of those catacombs that he discovered no longer exist today, just from the ravages of time and
Right.
things like that. But yeah, those are the Roman catacombs. So, what about these Paris catacombs that we have all
What
heard
about them?
about? What about those? They actually came way later, which I did not actually know until I started researching this. So basically, before Paris was really Paris, and it was, you know, kind of in these like semi like Romanish times. There was the city had the burial ground on the outskirts of it, but they ended up moving like the bulk of the city, which put the cemetery like in the center of the city. and they kept
Dope.
expanding around it. So it was kind of the opposite of like the no bodies in Rome thing.
It was like bodies right here
Bodies right
in the
here.
middle.
And you start to see why Rome made this rule, because these cemeteries got fucking full as hell. Um,
Yeah, well, yeah, really populous area.
Yep. So by the mid 1700s, the most popular cemetery in Paris was Holy Innocents Cemetery, which at this point had been in continuous use for 500 years, and 1/10 of the city's dead was buried there every year.
So not very many people.
You know, just a
Really
couple.
small
Just a
potatoes, yeah.
handful. So the cemetery was also located like right next to a big popular market. And oh, should I mention that it was the custom at the time to be buried in a mass grave that they would just leave open until it was full?
Oh,
So they just had bodies like hanging out in the open air in a
while you're
pile,
while
rotting.
you're shopping for your
Yep,
vegetables next
while
door.
you're doing your shopping.
Oh
Um,
my god. In
and
front of my salad?
Right?
Literally?
Not in front of my salad. So in 1780, people who were living near the cemetery complained about respiratory issues and delirium. And it was
Oh.
discovered that a basement wall of a building abutted to the cemetery had bust open from the
Ooh.
pressure of the grave behind it, and nasty gases were leaking up into people's houses. And everyone was like, all right, we got to do something about this.
You don't want those sweet, sweet decomposition gases leaking into your buildings?
Gotta love I love the smell of corpse gas in the morning.
In the morning, yeah. The best part of waking up is corpse gas in your cup.
Yes. You know, you just get a little bit of your daily delirium from some corpse gas.
Hey, I'm gonna have it anyway. It doesn't matter
It's
how I get
exactly,
it.
right? Might as well, might as well. So much like in Rome, there had been a bunch of mining and tunneling done under the city at one point. So they had all these tunnels, and simultaneous to the cemetery problem, they were having problems with sinkholes,
Oh,
because there were all of these tunnels under the city that
sure.
the city
That
had
we're
then
collapsing.
expanded and built on top of, and they were collapsing. Um,
Sure.
so they
That's
were
like one of those things that I know is real, but then people are like, "We have sinkholes," and I'm like, "What?
what?
That's from movies.
I
That's not
know,
real."
not
Yeah.
good. So they were like, "Fuck, we got to put something in these tunnels," so they start collapsing. And oh my gosh, we also have all these dead bodies that we got to do
That we
something
gotta
with.
put somewhere.
Hey. So they literally just started carting loads of bones out of Paris cemeteries and putting them in the tunnels, and thus the Paris catacombs were born. Um,
I don't know why I'm having this image in my head of, like, these skeletons having a great time getting to, like, see the city on their way to the
oh my
catacomb.
gosh, right?
Like, they're in a little wheelbarrow, and they're like, "Ooh, look what
Ooh.
they've done with the market. That looks great."
I know. I was gonna say it's like taking like a scenic bus tour through a
Right, yeah.
city. The skeletons are like,
Double-decker wheelbarrow.
wow. I love it. Yeah, apparently they
Ah,
were like talking about like these like midnight carts of bones going
oh my
across the
gosh.
city, which I don't think it was a secret or anything, but still just
No, but it's,
imagine
like,
how startling it would
unseemly.
be to be just a person, like maybe you're out like drinking and you just see a
Just
cart
a
full of
cart of
bones
bones.
going by.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, even to someone like us, that would be startling. So to your average Frenchman in 17
Yes.
whatever.
Be like, "Oh, shit." So the Paris catacombs were officially named the Paris Municipal Ossuary, which is a pretty cool name.
It
Um,
is.
there was a brief pause in the moving of bodies because the French Revolution happened. Um,
Sure.
but then they were like, "Oh, actually, we've got even more bodies now."
More bodies, right,
So
yeah, yeah.
in you go. A lot of famous revolutionaries and stuff are in the Paris catacombs. And at first, it sounds like it was just kind of like a very sloppy bone storage. Like it was just kind of like they were just kind of chucking people in there.
Sure.
But I need you to get ready for an extremely good name that I'm gonna do my very best
I
at.
can't wait.
So who should come along but Louis Etienne Francois Héricard Ferrand, the Vicomte de
Amazing.
Toury. Um, and he
You did very well with that.
Thank
You
you.
did great.
Thank you very much. So he was like a fancy rich guy who was like, I'm the head of the mines, I'm head quarry guy for Paris. And he
Yeah.
was like, we got to dress this place up. So he is responsible. He came in around 1810 and started doing all the cool bone artwork that we see in here, putting up like signage about what cemeteries bodies had come from, and kind of like making like little like informational museum like
Amazing.
areas.
Thank you, little goth queer man.
Right? Like, thank
He's
you,
like,
sir.
we gotta beautify this place.
Right? He's like, these catacombs, they need to queer eye for the catacomb.
Queer eye for the dead guy.
uh, but yeah, it was open, so it was open to the public starting in 1809, 1810, as ordered by Napoleon, who was like, people should look at the dead bodies. Um,
Thanks, Napoleon.
thanks, Napoleon.
You are famously the worst.
Right. And there was, so I didn't take a whole lot of notes on it because it was a little bit of a side tangent, but there were some interesting talks about this idea of like having all of these bones just kind of hanging out together, what could be sort of like, what's the word I'm looking for, like thematically tied back to like the revolution and the idea of like men being equal and stuff, and like none of us
Mhm.
are in our own fancy graves, we're just
That's I was
all in a
actually
pile of bones together.
I was gonna ask, so is everyone at this point being buried this way? There are no ground burials happening at all?
I think
Like,
there
even for the wealthy?
I think there are some ground burials happening, but they definitely like they closed the Holy Innocents and were like no one else can be buried
No
here.
more.
So I
Okay.
think there was still some burials in some further out places, but for the most part they were like, all right, we're gonna stop doing this for now.
You're all going in a hole.
We're
Yeah,
going in the
okay, cool.
hole. So the catacombs are still open today, as we said. There are specific areas that are open to tourists, and it is illegal to otherwise enter the catacombs without permission. But of course, people definitely do that. There is
Mhm.
a whole there. I read another whole article about the cataphiles, as they call them, which is
Oh,
what they call people who like are
who
just
are
obsessed with,
really
who are
into
into the catacombs and just want to go hang out down there. People will sneak in just to like explore and look around, but also to party. There was famously a secret bar and movie theater found in one of the
What?
catacombs. Yeah, like in I think like 2014, some like police were walking around, making sure no one was hanging out in the catacombs, and they
Oh
found like a whole
my
like
god.
underground cinema that people had built in there, which sounds just fucking rad as hell.
I was gonna say, here's the deal. I understand that at a base level, that's disrespectful, but on a much different level, I want to watch a movie surrounded by bones. That's
Yeah. It sounds pretty rad.
that's dope as hell. What?
Yes.
Okay. New life goal
Right,
unlocked.
I know.
For legal purposes, I never said that on a podcast.
Yeah. Invite us to your secret catacomb party, and we definitely won't
Won't
go.
talk
Wink,
about it here.
wink.
Yeah. Wink, wink. We how would we even get to Paris?
Ridiculous. Not
We would never
possible.
do that.
But yeah, that is the story of catacombs. There are a couple other places around the world that are referred to as the catacombs, but these were kind of the original ones, and then obviously the Paris ones are very famous. And I just thought it was really interesting that they occurred so far apart from each other, and
Yeah.
that they were like, hey, let's do that thing where you put the bodies in the tunnels.
E well, and if so what's interesting too, and obviously I have not prepared research on this for this, so I may
Yes.
be
Yeah.
speaking incorrectly, so take this with a grain of salt. But, just speaking to that, idea of, we're all kind of equal in death, putting all the bones in the same place is interesting too, because if I'm not mistaken, there was also a period in Mexico where they were using catacombs to basically like dump the bodies of people who were too poor to be buried,
Mm,
which is like the opposite
yeah,
sentiment.
yeah.
So it's interesting just like based on, and again, I may be incorrect in that, but I seem to remember reading about this at one point. And just like, yeah, based on where you're at in the world, that might look very different, you know?
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
and just kind of the feeling of the time, like, you can
right.
definitely it can happen in a more, like, accepted, like, "This is just what we do" kinda way, or it can be more of a derogatory type of thing for
And I
someone.
think they're kind of, I mean, it's interesting because I do just think of them as being generally cool and beautiful.
Yeah.
So it's I guess that with France being kind of the big daddy of catacombs, it's set that precedent of them being like, wow, what a cool, amazing thing. Um, I definitely, like I said, that's my bucket list item. I want to, I mean, France in general, because I
Yes.
spent all this time learning the freaking language. I'd like to go use it. But I also, yeah, I would just absolutely perish to see the catacombs in real life. Did
Yes.
you didn't go to France when you did your,
No, I
okay,
didn't. Yeah, so
okay,
I also have not been to France.
okay.
It was actually after I did the Catacomb Saints episode, one of my coworkers had recently come back from Paris and showed me all of her
Hmm.
pictures of the catacombs, and I was like, "Oh, I want to
Ah,
go in
darn,
there.
darn
I
you.
gotta go
Yeah,
in there." And she said it was
yeah,
so
but did
weird
that
because you can just like look like past the area where you're like allowed to be, and just bones going on for forever.
just bones for days? Yeah, but did your coworker get to see a bejeweled skeleton? Psh,
Mm,
no.
no, I don't think so. I mean, yeah, that was my little look inside the catacombs, and I could have. I am definitely considering doing like ossuaries and like bone art as a future
Mhm.
episode because I was like, there's too much to get into that today. That would be
Sure.
a whole kind of
Its
thing,
own
but I
thing.
am very fascinated by that as well. And
I would
like you
like to.
definitely in the theme of Catholics used to be goth.
Right, right. Penny's one of Penny's favorite places to venture on this podcast.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I would like to put in my formal vote for an ossuary episode.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you, friends, for joining us today. If you have visited a catacomb in Paris or Rome or anywhere in the world, let us know how it was. Did you see lots of bones? Did it make you think about your mortality, or were you just like, "Wow, these are some sweet bones"? The people need to know. If you enjoyed listening to this episode today, we would be delighted if you would leave us a review. That helps us out when you leave it on a platform, or you can leave it as a comment if you are not able to leave one where you listen. And I do believe Midge has one for us today.
I do. This is a Instagram comment review from, now this is either A Emmett 711 or Amit
Hmm.
711. I'm not sure. But this is a review that says 10 stars with
Hey!
two star emojis on either side. Our favorite number of stars,
Yes.
5 for each of us. 10 stars across the board. Thanks for reminding this Zennial about Christopher Pike. Did we talk about Christopher Pike?
Yes. In the 90s horror,
In my
campaign horror,
episode?
I mentioned Christopher Pike
Oh,
because
I was like, I don't
that
remember
those
talking.
were the spooky, like, young adult books that I used to see.
That's right. Okay. Well, you've reminded our friend here of Christopher Pike. And they say, I have a Gen X sister, so his books were always within an arm's reach.
Yes.
Shout out to Remember Me and the most diva title, Bury Me Deep Bitches.
Hell yeah.
Of course, he didn't put bitches in the title. It was the 90s.
It was the bitches
uh,
was implied.
Implied bitches. Uh, also on YouTube, there's a channel called Pikecast.
Ooh,
Did not know that. That's the end of the review. So Penny, that's for you. I never read a
noted.
Christopher Pike book, so maybe that's something I need to explore in my adult years.
Yes.
But
I can't imagine that they are literary masterpieces, but I sure do remember them being pretty spooky.
I do have to, this has nothing to do with our episode, but I do have to plug, since we're in this
Yes.
vein, that R.L. Stein tweeted yesterday, or
Yes.
X'd, I guess.
Yes.
Whatever the hell Elon wants to call it now. Um but he confirmed that Netflix is in production with another Fear Street movie, specifically based on the Prom Queen book,
Yes.
which was, in my opinion, one of the best ones of the Fear Street series. So I am hyped about that.
I definitely remember being very distressed by that book cover.
Oh, it's so good. It's such a good cover. Oh, so yeah.
Spooky.
Thanks for taking us down that memory lane, to our friend who reviewed. Thank you for your 10 stars. We appreciate you.
Yes, thank you so much. If you would like to be an Instagram follower and keep up with us, you can find the podcast at Ghouls Night In Pod. And if you are looking for me, you can find me at Penny Snark.
And you can find me all over the web at Midge Munster.
And until next time, good